The easy answer would right now be learn how to meditate. Okay? But to really bring it into perspective right now, overthinking is either something inside of the mind is fluctuating all the time. There is too much input available and it's jumping from one to another. So in a way, there is that type of restlessness of the mind. It's continuously jumping, which means it's too much. So you're thinking about too many different things. This is one type of overthinking. Overthinking can also mean you only have one thing that is like keeping you busy, but you are turning it over and over again and never come to any type of conclusion. It's also a type of overthinking related to, let's say, one subject. So these are now simplified, the two problematic states. Problematic if you don't have the ability to switch it off if you want to switch it off.
Spread love, man.
Okay, so you're out there, you're trying to figure things out, learn more, get a real grip on how things work.
Right.
That's awesome. But, I get it. Sometimes I feel this too, that drive to understand can kind of backfire and you end up stuck in this overthinking spiral.
Yeah, totally.
You're aiming for clarity and effectiveness, but your brain decides to just spin its wheels.
It's a bit of a paradox, that desire to really dig deep can actually become a roadblock, stopping you from getting where you want to be.
Exactly. What's cool about it is that it's not just airy-fairy concepts.
Yeah.
It actually gives you practical ways to see how this overthinking thing works.
Right.
And more importantly, what you can actually do to change it.
Yeah.
So our goal today is to pull out those actionable pieces, the stuff you can actually start using right away to create a more balanced mental space and importantly, not get swamped by your own thoughts.
Yeah, exactly. The goal is to kind of refine this down into something that really clicks with your drive to understand things thoroughly. But without getting stuck in those unproductive loops in your mind. Kind of like honing your mental tools for more effective learning.
Yeah, right. Okay, let's get down to it. So, according to SHI HENG YI, overthinking isn't just this big jumble of thoughts, right?
Yeah.
He actually breaks it down into two main types. So the first one is mind restlessness. And you've probably felt this. It's that feeling where your mind's constantly hopping between a million different things.
Right.
Probably triggered by, the constant flood of information coming at us these days.
Yeah, that's a perfect way to put it. It's almost like trying to read a book, but at the same time, you're checking notifications on your phone and you're thinking about your to-do list, right?
Right.
Your mental energy is all over the place. It keeps shifting gears. And, for someone like you who values really diving into a topic and gaining a deep understanding, this can be so frustrating.
Yeah, I bet.
Because it stops you from having that focused attention.
Yeah.
You need to really get those insights.
Right.
You might feel like you're touching on a lot of things, but you're not really absorbing any one thing.
It totally makes sense. It's like, imagine trying to follow a complicated argument, but someone keeps interrupting with random questions that have nothing to do with it. You never get anywhere.
Exactly.
And then the second type he talks about is rumination.
Yeah.
So this is when you get kind of fixated on a single problem. You turn it over and over in your head. You analyze every angle.
Right.
But you don't actually reach any new conclusions, or find a way to move forward. It's like being on a mental hamster wheel.
Yeah. And for someone who's all about efficient learning and having those aha moments, this is just a huge energy drain. Instead of opening up new understanding, it keeps you stuck in that same mental space.
Right.
You just keep revisiting the same points without actually making any real progress. It's like the opposite of productive, deep thinking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we've got the scattered mind, which makes it tough to really dive into anything.
Right.
And the stuck mind, which prevents us from moving forward. So what's the key to navigating all of this?
Yeah.
Well, the discussion points to this thing called mental regulation.
Right.
It's basically the ability to consciously direct and shift your focus.
It's it, yeah. Overthinking becomes a problem when this regulatory mechanism kind of goes off the rails. It's not about trying to shut down thinking altogether. That's usually a losing battle.
Right.
It's about taking back control, being aware of where your attention is going and how long it stays there.
Okay, yeah.
So when you really need to focus, to grasp a complex idea?
Yeah.
Can you actually do it? Or your mind constantly getting pulled away by that restlessness? Or are you just stuck in this loop replaying the same thing over and over? That inability to focus when you need to, that's the core issue.
It makes a lot of sense. So when we do want to really hone in on something, why is that so important, for someone who's trying to learn and be effective? Well, the discussion emphasizes that focused attention is how we make progress.
Yeah.
It's how we develop real expertise in specific areas.
Yeah.
It's like imagine taking these scattered rays of light and you focus them through a lens to create this really intense point.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. Focus is what gives you that concentrated mental energy that you need for deep processing.
Yeah.
Whether you're trying to master a new concept, solve a difficult problem, or really understand the subtleties of something you're researching, that sustained, directed mental effort is essential. It lets you build connections, spot patterns, and come up with new insights that you wouldn't get from just skimming the surface.
Right. But, a question that pops into my mind, and I'm sure listeners thought about this too, with so much stuff competing for our attention these days, different sources of information, different priorities in our lives, how do we decide what deserves that focused attention? It feels like this constant juggling act.
That's such a crucial point. I mean, in today's world, we're just bombarded with information, right? Demands on our time and attention are everywhere. The real skill lies not just in being able to focus, but also in having the wisdom to figure out what truly deserves that focus. What aligns with your goals for learning and being effective.
Okay, and this is where the discussion gets really interesting, I think. Because along with this whole idea of focus, the source brings up the concept of overview, or having a wide view. Can you expand on how this perspective kind of works with, or maybe even contrasts with, that narrow focus we've been talking about?
Sure. Think of it this way. Imagine you're totally absorbed in reading a detailed report on a specific historical event.
Right.
That's your focus, right? Now, picture stepping back and looking at a timeline of the entire century.
Okay.
And you see how that event fits into the bigger context of social, political, and economic changes. That's the overview.
Okay, yeah.
So, while focus lets you examine the specifics, the overview gives you that crucial context. It helps you understand how things are connected.
Right.
If you're only ever focused on the tiny details, you might miss those bigger trends and influences that are at play.
That's a helpful way to see it. So it's not about picking one over the other, is it? The ideal, like the source says, is to develop both. The ability to really focus and the capacity for this broad, open awareness. That sounds tricky, though.
It does take some work, but think about driving, right? You absolutely have to focus on steering the car, watching the road right in front of you.
Right.
But you also need to be aware of what's around you. Other cars, people walking, road signs. You can't drive safely and effectively if you only do one or the other.
Right.
They're linked. They both matter.
Yeah. And the source even mentions the idea of yin and yang,
Yeah.
these seemingly opposite forces that actually depend on each other and create a whole, we don't need to go deep into the philosophy here, but that core idea that these two seemingly contrasting abilities actually work together.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense.
Totally. It's about getting past that either thinking. You don't have to choose between being laser focused or completely open and unfocused.
Right.
The goal is to develop both capacities
Yeah.
and to know when to use each one effectively.
Okay, so how do we actually cultivate this balance?
Yeah.
The focused attention and the broad awareness. Well, the source suggests something really practical.
Yeah.
Intentionally practicing these states separately.
Right.
So you can really understand how each one feels different.
Exactly. That's where the practical advice kicks in. To really integrate these abilities, you got to be able to clearly tell them apart. So think about it. What does it feel like for you to be deeply concentrated on a single task or piece of information? Consciously blocking out distractions. And then what does it feel like to intentionally broaden your awareness? Taking in your surroundings, the wider context, without getting fixated on any one thing.
Right.
By actually experiencing each state, you build up that mental agility to switch between them more intentionally.
Right.
It's a skill you can develop with practice, which should be encouraging, right?
Yeah, I would think so.
Especially for someone who values having practical tools for learning.
Absolutely. It's not like some innate talent you're born with. It's a muscle you can train. And the discussion kind of leads to this idea that combining focus and openness creates this personal magic. It lets us move past rigid either thinking in how we process information and engage with the world.
Yeah, and what's so valuable about that is that this integration brings you a much richer and more nuanced understanding. You're not just absorbing isolated facts or getting lost in the details. You're seeing the connections, you're grasping the bigger picture, but you still have that ability to dive deep into analysis when you need to.
Okay.
It's about being both well-informed and insightful.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the key things you want our listener to take away as they continue on their journey of learning and seeking knowledge?
The main point is that overthinking isn't just one big problem. It shows up in different ways. That restless, easily distracted mind, or the repetitive, unproductive rumination. And the answer isn't to try and shut down your thoughts completely. It's about cultivating that mental regulation, the ability to consciously shift between focused engagement and broader awareness.
And, as the source emphasizes, developing that ability to regulate your focus has direct benefits for what you're trying to achieve.
Right.
It lets you take in information more effectively without feeling overwhelmed by the sheer amount of it.
Exactly.
You can achieve that deep understanding you're looking for,
Yeah.
but you also keep a grasp on the bigger context.
Exactly. It's about having that mental flexibility to zoom in for a detailed look and zoom out for the wider perspective, all through conscious choice, not just being controlled by your thoughts.
So here's a final thought for you to consider. Try setting aside short periods of time to really intensely focus on a single piece of information. Really immerse yourself in it. Then intentionally broaden your awareness. Think about its surrounding context, what it means, how it connects to other things you know. How might consciously shifting between focused attention and open awareness fundamentally change how you learn, solve problems, make decisions? What new connections and insights might pop up when you actively cultivate both the focused lens and the wide-angle view? It's about discovering your own personal magic in that dynamic balance.
Absolutely.
So until next time, keep diving deep.